Hi quilters! Today we're going to be looking at a selvage quilt, and this one I'm calling the pickup sticks quilt because it reminds me of how as a child you would throw out your sticks on the ground and then you would just carefully pick them up, and this reminds me of that. So that's where my title for my quilt comes from. And I had three goals with this one. I wanted to use leftover fabric from other projects that I still have in my stash. I want to use up all my selvages, and I have a lot. And I also want to have just a nice, soft, feminine read on the background of the quilt when I'm looking at it. For this quilt, my background blocks were 12.5 by 12.5, and then they finished at 12 by 12. And I have 72 by 72 inches is the finished size of the quilt.
Say you have a stack of fabric like this. This is all long strings of selvages that I have had from other projects, and I want to put them into a project at this time. I've already done a project like this, and I still have more than I can use. I've pulled these fabrics from my stash, and I've cut them up into 12.5 by 12.5 inch blocks. And then I've taken a picture of them, and the next step that I will do is decide on how I want to lay these out as a background on my quilt. I'm aiming for a soft, feminine looking quilt. It's not going to be super high contrast, but it should be just very comfortable to put in a little girl's room. These are scraps of fabric from other projects, and so I don't have a specific or an even amount of fabric to use for this quilt that I'm going to be doing. So what I'm going to do is lay these out in a PowerPoint and try to figure out a design that's going to give me a workable background. I've counted out the number of each of these blocks that I have, and I've dropped them into the PowerPoint. Now I know that most people would just manipulate them on the computer, but I actually cut them out and then shuffled them around on paper for a little bit. My normal way to do this would be to stand on a staircase and look. What I'm trying to get at is some diagonal movement through the quilt. And one of the things that's nice about laying something like this out is my husband will come by and I'll get a second set of eyes on this, and he'll start shifting things around for me. This gives me just a little bit more time to look at the background than I would normally spend on it. Now, if you're wondering what I'm going to do with these, with the selvages, my inspiration for this is the pickup sticks game that children play. In other words, I want a completely random looking group of selvages so that it looks like I've just tossed them out on the fabric.
When I was planning out this quilt, one of the things that I was thinking about is if you took this quilt off of a bed and you laid it down under the shade of a tree and you laid a baby on it, just if you're enjoying a summer afternoon, I would want the baby to immediately start picking and playing with these little details on the quilt. And that's expressly the reason that I have them in the quilt to start with. As I'm starting this, I'm working from a pile of selvages, and all of these I've just pressed in half like this. So I'll just pick one out, and I'm going to go not exactly corner to corner. The process is just the same for all of these, but I'm going to work around my tripod here. And just sew this on. The one thing about these is you really don't line it up until you get to it. I've noticed that this will put a curve on some of mine, but it's not been particularly bothersome. So once you've got it here, you just fold it over like this. And you give it a little bit of a finger press down. And you'll start over right where you began your first set of stitches. Once I have these joined together like this, then I will come back and I will join these. The one place that you really want to make sure that these line up is right here. And so when I'm putting these together, I always pin right here just because that is the most likely place for it to come apart, and it's really noticeable. You notice that you're not having to join up. Hopefully you don't even have these running together here where your pickup sticks have came in. So you would just, I will pin here, I'll pin at the next joint here, and then I'll come in the middle. If there were any fluff or these are going to join up nicely, but if there were anything that needs to be eased in, I would take it in, I would ease in between right here and the middle, somewhere right in here. And then I would make a pin here and a pin there. So I have these laid out in my dining room right now, and you'll notice that I just have them laid out by rows. So this is one quadrant, and it's laid out, I join two together, and then I join one more to make my rows. So once you get your rows and your two quadrants together, you just sew them right up the middle like this one is here, and it really starts to look like a quilt. What I have here is the quadrants are 36 inches by 36 inches. So I have a 72-inch piece here. So this is half the quilt. I haven't put it together any further because this, if you're a machine quilter, is a really excellent time to quilt it. In fact, I would advise quilting it in quadrants rather than even a piece this large because it gets really, really heavy.
I have my machine sitting on a homemade quilt frame. It's important to make all my adjustments because I'm working on the other end of the machine. I'm using an embroidery foot that has a spring action. This seems to work well for this kind of work. After you get everything quilted, the next step will be to cut your binding. I like to cut mine at 2.5-inch strips. This seems to work well for me, and I'm not cutting on the bias. I'm going straight across the width of the fabric. Have your fabric cut into strips, then you want to join them end to end. Now you'll notice that I have the wrong side of the fabric facing up, and I have a fold that is a 45-degree angle. I'm going to put some Elmer's washable school glue along this angle right here, and then I'm going to lay a piece of the strip of the other piece of fabric on top of it, and I'm going to glue this together. Once I've got it glued together, I'll just move on along all of the lengths of the strips and join them all end to end. Heat setting the glue will give you a really nice, strong bond that will hold this very securely in place until you're ready to sew your strips together. The reason why you're stitching along your fabric on the diagonal right here is because when you apply your binding to your quilt, you want it to sit in such a way that your seams don't hit in the same way and make a lot of bulk, because your quilt is already bulky, and although these seams don't seem bulky, when you have them all hit in the same place, it will get much harder to sew through. After you've stitched along your diagonal fold line, the next thing that you're going to do is press these. And after you press them, you're going to open them up and cut away the bulk on the inside, the little triangle bulk. This is an example of don't do what I did. I got to the end of my binding and I was joining it together and cut through it by accident. Here's how I fixed it. So this was a big, heavy quilt. It turned out 72 inches by 72 inches. This hit the goal of using up some of my fabric stash, and it also used up every single piece of selvage in my quilt stash.
Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell for more compulsive quilting and embroidery videos.